My name's Ali. I'm 23 and I'm from East Lothian here in Scotland. I've been a fan of the channel for a while now, so I know this probably doesn't qualify as your typical scary story, but it's something that's been bothering me for a long time, and if it scares me, then I'm pretty sure it'll scare your viewers too. 3.5 years ago, a lad that I went to school with murdered his grandparents. It happened on Boxing Day of 2021, and it was all over the news the next morning that this lovely old couple had been found stabbed to death in their own home. Police said that they'd arrested the person that had done it, but for the first few days, they didn't release any details on who they were. Then, once they were sure that they were going to charge the person with murder, the police announced who it was: their own grandson. As you can probably imagine, everyone was absolutely gobsmacked when they found out, but what we wanted to know was why. Why kill your own grandparents in such a horrible way on the day after Christmas, too? We had to wait ages for the hearing and all, but there were loads of rumors flying around about why he'd killed them. I think most people thought that it was like a mental illness thing. So when the hearing kicked off and the lad's lawyers told the court that he heard voices telling him to kill his nan and granddad, there was this collective thing of, told you so. I understand why people would choose to believe that too. I mean, why else would someone kill two people that love and care for them? This lad was living with them at the time, and they were looking after him too, properly, and they weren't abusive or anything. So he had to be mental to do something so horrible, right? But no one knew him thought that, though. At least no one I knew anyway, because, in actual fact, the guy had always been like that. At school, everyone called him James, or Jay for short, and even back then he was a proper weirdo. And I don't mean a little bit of a weirdo, like lovably weird. I mean he was a complete arsehole. He was a bit of a goth, loved his rock music, obsessed over horror films, but none of the other goths in our school would hang around with him because he was a total dick. I'm sure the school had a name for whatever condition he had, antisocial behavior disorder or something, but to us, he was just an arsehole. Some of my mates grew up with dyslexia, autism, ADHD, you name it, but they were sound guys, that lovable kind of weird, whereas Jay was just an arrogant prick with a bad case of main character syndrome. The last I heard of Jay, he changed his name from James to Vincent, and people wondered why for a bit until someone worked out that it was because he was obsessed with some vampire film that had a character with that name. And that was Jay in a nutshell, really. He thought he was better than he really was, when really, he was just a sad act. We thought that's all he was, too. A total dickhead, but a fairly harmless one, and then he went and murdered his own bloody grandparents and proved us all wrong. I actually did start to believe that Jay had gone just mental because we started hearing all this stuff about how he was hearing voices and that he didn't really remember killing his nana and granddad and just sort of came to after it happened. You see, he actually handed himself into the police after he'd done it, went right down to the police station and told them everything. So to me, it sort of did seem like he'd had a mad psychotic episode then felt terrible afterwards. But then we all heard something about how the thing that caused Jay to snap was an argument over a Christmas hamper. Someone had sent Jay's grandparents a load of wine and cheese or whatever, or maybe a few of those miniature whiskey samplers. Either way, there was alcohol involved, and Jay decided that he wanted it all for himself. He very selfishly F's off to his bedroom with the booze, and then up the stairs comes Granddad to tell him to give it back. An argument ensued, nasty words were exchanged, but then Jay's solution was to grab a kitchen knife and stab both of his grandparents so deep that there were knife marks on their bones. Jay's lawyers obviously managed to weave in the whole story about him being a schizophrenic, and I read that some doctor agreed that he wasn't fit to stand trial. He never went to prison. He's in some mental institution now, but I think that's exactly what he wanted. I don't give a monkey's toss what some doctor has to say about it, because anyone who knew him knows that Jay has always been like that. If he didn't get his way, he threw a fit, which is basically why he had no friends in school. I also think Jay's behavioral problems are why he ended up living with his grandparents in the first place. He turned 18, his parents told him to get his act together or get out of their house, and the grandparents stepped in to take care of him. All that considered, I think it makes what he did to them extra terrible. They gave him a chance, and he returned the favor by stabbing them both to death on freaking Boxing Day of all days. I don't think he's sorry either. I think he regrets killing them because he has to face the consequences of his actions, but that's all he's sorry for. First thing he did after killing his grandparents was to think, how can I spin this to make me look as good as possible, which was exactly the same kind of thing he did in school. Not long ago, me and a few pals went to a local boozer for a few pints on Boxing Day, and I ended up bumping into one of the goths that I used to hang around with in school. We swapped a wee bit of small talk at first, the sort of how you been, what you been up to. But then after we gotten a few drinks in us, the subject of Weirdo Jay came up, and he ended up telling me what happened to make his little friend group exclude him, and by the time he'd finished, I was practically picking my jaw up off the floor. They'd been hanging around with Jay just after school kicked out, walking through the school car park to where the bus stop for school pickups used to be. He said Jay picked up a rock, then just hurled it through the car window of a teacher he'd clashed with that day. They were all like, "What the bloody hell do you think you're doing, you rage?" And then everyone legs it, but then the next day, they all get dragged up to the head teacher's office where there's a police officer waiting for them. The whole thing had been partially caught on camera, so the teachers knew roughly who it was. They just needed to figure out exactly who did it and why. The goth lads, once they were told it had been caught on camera, owned up to the fact that they'd been there when the window was smashed, but they also told the truth when they said that it was Jay's fault and that he'd done it out of the blue. One second, they're just walking along having a bit of crack, and the next, Jay's lashing a stone through the car's window. All four goth lads said the same thing, but then when it came time to question Jay about it, he gave an excuse that sounds frighteningly familiar. He told the head, and the Bobby who was with him, that it was the four goth lads that had bullied him into doing it. According to Jay, the lads that he was with had threatened him with a good old-fashioned kicking if he didn't smash the window, so to save himself a hiding, he did as they told him. And that was Jay all over. Nothing was ever his fault. There was always someone else to blame. Every situation he entered himself into was unfair, and folks conspired against him no matter where he went or what he did. But then, I'm sure you're asking by now, why didn't Jay get expelled for smashing a teacher's car window? Well, word was that he put on such a good show that the teachers didn't know who to believe. So rather than go ahead and press charges against him or exclude him from school, Jay ended up with a week's suspension, and then he was allowed to come back. But then the other goth lads got the same punishment too. He obviously stopped hanging around with those goth boys, but it wasn't because they were bullying him. It was because he couldn't manipulate and control them. To me, I see exact parallels between what happened with that car window and what happened with his grandparents. He learned from a very early age that it's possible to manipulate the system, even though you've done something wrong. The lad that I bumped into at the pub said that, after the whole window smashing incident, Jay had personally told him that he was untouchable. He used that exact word too, untouchable. They never hung around with him again after that, having secured the title of the most arrogant prick they'd ever had the displeasure of coming across. But Jay didn't just stay some arrogant gobshite. He got worse and worse, until in the end, when he learned that he couldn't manipulate his grandparents anymore, he just killed them. If he'd just gone to prison for 30, 40 years, it wouldn't bother me so much, and I 100% wouldn't be writing this. But an absolute psychopath of the cringiest order has managed to game the system and basically get away with murder. Instead of living the rest of his life in a vulnerable prisoners unit, because blokes are rightfully kicking the crap out of him for killing two lovely old dears who wanted nothing more than to look after their wayward grandson, Jay is living out the rest of his life in relative comfort, having completely cheated the system and won. And that scares me more than any ghost story ever could.
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. It was December 31st, and I could feel the dread creeping up on me. This day, along with its counterpart, January 1st, are the 2 days I despise the most. The reasons for my distaste are multifaceted. First, I fail to see the logic in celebrating the arrival of a new year, when in reality, another year is always just around the corner. Secondly, the hypocrisy of people who make fake resolutions only to break them the very next day is baffling to me. And lastly, the loneliness that engulfs me on this night is unbearable. As I sit alone in my living room drinking beer and watching others have fun, drink, dance, and kiss each other on TV, I'm left with nothing but my bitter thoughts. Perhaps my pessimism is due to my middle age, but nonetheless, these 2 days never fail to fill me with a sense of dread. I found myself in need of some comfort food, so I decided to order from KFC. Despite knowing how unhealthy it was, I wanted to indulge in some hot and crispy chicken wings. As I pulled out my phone and opened the KFC app, my Instagram notifications started flooding in. I felt a pang of annoyance when I saw a notification from Tiffany, who had posted pictures of herself at the New Year party she had gone to. I quickly turned off the notifications and focused on placing my order. I selected my favorite chicken wings and added some sides to the cart before finalizing the purchase. Despite feeling a little bitter about everything, I was looking forward to my KFC order and the temporary comfort it would bring. I kept switching between different channels on my TV. Couldn't help but notice that every single one was airing some sort of New Year's program, which only made my already sour mood even worse. However, after browsing through several channels, I finally settled on one that was showing the movie Puss in Boots and decided to watch it instead. As I settled in to watch the movie, I found myself glancing at my wristwatch often, eagerly anticipating the arrival of my food. However, time seemed to be moving at an agonizingly slow pace, like a snail crawling along. After 30 minutes had passed, I began to grow concerned that my food still had not arrived. I quickly opened up the food delivery app to check on the status of my order, which revealed that the delivery person was only a minute away from delivering my eagerly awaited meal. While I waited for the delivery guy to arrive, that 1 minute seemed to crawl by agonizingly slow. After what felt like an eternity, I heard a loud bang on my door, and I immediately assumed it was the delivery man. My heart racing with anticipation, I walked over to the door and peered through the peephole to confirm. But to my surprise, I didn't see a delivery executive standing there. Instead, there was a disheveled-looking man wearing a dirty brown shirt that looked like it hadn't been washed in days. His presence sent a chill down my spine, and I felt an ominous feeling in my gut. The man didn't knock or ring the doorbell again. He just stared at the door. Suddenly, he glanced around, and I noticed he was about to put his eye on the peephole. Without thinking, I quickly hid myself from view and placed my hands over my mouth to prevent any noise, for I had a gut feeling that this man was up to no good, and I couldn't help but feel my heart hammering in my chest. The ordinary night that I anticipated to be dull and uneventful was swiftly turning into a spine-chilling horror movie. I was at a loss for what to do, how to protect myself from the eerie presence lurking outside my apartment. However, before I could even gather my thoughts, I heard a voice. It was the delivery guy, who had arrived with my food order. He called out to the stranger, asking if he was the only one who had placed the order. I peered through the peephole and saw the stranger trying to grab the bag of food from the delivery guy. The delivery guy, sensing that something was off, asked the stranger to confirm his identity. That's when things took a turn for the worst. The stranger's demeanor changed in an instant, and he lashed out at the delivery guy with startling ferocity. I could see the fear in the delivery guy's eyes as he struggled to defend himself. In that moment, I felt as if everything was happening in slow motion. I could feel my heart pounding against my chest as I watched the creepy stranger attack him. Realizing the gravity of the situation, I grabbed my cell phone and dialed 911 to report what was happening. As I waited for the police to arrive, I witnessed the creepy stranger taking out a sharp object. Panic set in as he lunged and stabbed the delivery guy. That was when the sirens of the police car pierced through the air and the man ran off. It was a terrifying experience, but thankfully, the police arrived on time and sent the delivery guy to a nearby hospital. I told them everything that happened, and the police began searching for the man. However, they couldn't find him. The authorities were never able to locate that man, which was even more unsettling considering the fact that he was still outside, waiting for a chance to attack someone. Though I never saw him after that night, the dread I once associated with December 31st and January 1st had intensified tenfold following that harrowing encounter. And as the years passed, the memory remained indelibly etched in my mind. I would often find myself pondering the potential outcomes if I had made the decision to open the door that night, and that thought alone was enough to send shivers down my spine.
Last night, my boyfriend and I were driving home from Universal Studios in Orlando. We were rerouted a way home we've never went before, and we're traveling in basically the middle of nowhere. My boyfriend's speedometer is broken in his car, and he has to press the button to reset the miles after he gets gas, and this will be very important soon. We were driving on a deserted road in the middle of absolute nowhere with not one car in sight. My boyfriend realized we hit the 130-mile mark on his odometer. We needed gas, but there was literally not one gas station in sight. I put search gas stations nearby, and we found one. It turned out to be closed. In a hurry, we found another gas station 5 minutes up the road, and this is where the story gets weird. My boyfriend thought that he closed his gas cap, and we were once again driving along this deserted road. We heard a loud bang, and he realized he forgot to put the gas cap back on, so we were driving around this dark road looking for the gas cap. He finally pulls over and realizes somehow the gas cap is still attached to the car. We get back on track to the other gas station. Out of nowhere, I had this horrible thought about something going wrong at that gas station. I pushed it aside because I knew we needed gas, and AAA is not an option where we were at the moment. We get to this gas station, the lights are kind of on. This road literally leads to a dead end, and with a gas station on it, the only way to leave this area was to turn left or go straight out of the gas station. My boyfriend got out of the car to see if we could get gas, and the feeling intensified. I have literally never felt like that in my life. My stomach dropping into my butt. I've been in very disturbing situations, such as almost being kidnapped twice, being followed home, watching someone being taken away in a body bag after being hit by a car, and even a paranormal situation. I can talk about these sometime in the future, but I had never felt like this before. I saw a white car pulling up the road to make a left. Keep in mind there is literally no one on this road. He pulls up and notices my boyfriend, and backs up with his windows down. I found this very strange because my boyfriend has a very nice sports car, and my mind immediately went into panic mode. I started screaming his name, and the man realized that someone else was in the car, myself, and turned left and sped off. Sadly, I didn't get his license plate because of how dark it was. This situation frightened me more than you can even imagine. It may not seem too scary, but it was easily one of the most terrifying things to watch because I didn't know if I was going to witness my boyfriend being robbed at gunpoint or something like that. The feeling and thought I had just 10 minutes earlier is what also made the situation even worse. I found a gas station with actual human life around, and we made it home safe and sound. Once I got home, my dad told me that the road we were driving on was famous for the many bodies being found on it. I hope no one ever gets put into the situation, and to the man who was planning to do something to my boyfriend, let's hope you never get away with it.
So this story takes place back in the early 2000s. I can't quite remember the exact year. It was late December, and Christmas was just right around the corner. My family tries to spend every other Christmas together, and we rotate on whose house will host the entire family. This year, it was my mother's turn. It was dinner time, and as you can imagine, with so many people in one house, it can get pretty crowded at the table. Most everyone decided that we're going to eat in the living room. Sometimes my mother didn't mind considering the fact that our kitchen table only sat, for I was sitting at the table next to my aunt with my small body. It was easy for me to sit on one side of the table with her. I had just stuck a large piece of broccoli on my fork and attempted to shove the vegetables in my mouth, when it fell off my fork, landing in the cup of juice that I'd been drinking. I was disappointed, but the most rational thing in my mind, I got up with the intention of dumping out the drink in the sink. But before I could move, my aunt stopped me, questioning as to what I thought I was doing. I told her what happened and showed her the broccoli that was quickly starting to break apart in my drink. I turned to go dump the cup down the sink when my aunt stopped me again, telling me not to be wasteful and fish out the broccoli and drink the juice. I laughed, thinking she was joking, telling her, "You crazy," in a joking manner. But she didn't take it that way. Oh boy, did she not take it that way at all. My aunt went eerily quiet, and her face goes blank. I can instantly feel a cold chill run up my spine, and honestly had felt like I had stepped on a landmine. My aunt tells me in a low tone, "Don't call me crazy." My smile had long been wiped away, and I tried my best to backpedal, explaining to her that I didn't think that she was actually crazy, that it was just a playful spin on words. This didn't go over well either, because she grabbed my arm and leaned in closer, repeating, "Don't call me crazy." I instantly know that if I don't apologize, something bad would happen. So I quickly apologized to her, and that seemed to satisfy her. She made me sit down and hovered over me until I ate the now extremely soggy broccoli and chugged down the cup of juice. Now, this might not seem terrifying or scary at all. Well, that was just the setup for the events that were to follow that evening. Later that night, most of my family had gone out. I can't remember where, but the only people in the house were myself, my older sister, my aunt, and her daughter, my second eldest cousin. I was sitting in my room watching TV when I started to hear yelling from the remover. It quickly got louder, and I knew it was my aunt and cousin. I'm not sure what it started the whole thing, but I do know why it had escalated the way it did. The two were having an argument over something, when my cousin told my aunt she was acting crazy, as she did the same thing I had done earlier. But unlike me, my cousin didn't apologize. She tried to explain to her as I did, but just like before, she wasn't having any of that, and my aunt exploded. I'm sitting in my room terrified when I hear a loud bang from the wall causes me to jump. After the bang came my cousin's screams of pure terror. I was too scared to move until I heard Russian footsteps. I look at my door and soon see my sister running by. Next thing I know, I can hear my aunt screaming and ranting at the top of her lungs, my sister pleading and begging her to stop, and the psalms my cousin along with a loud thud noise. I finally get enough courage to leave my room and look into the next room. And what I saw was an image seared in my mind to this day. My cousin was on the bed in the fetal position, trying to make herself as small as possible, just sobbing. She cried so much that she left a large wet spot on the bedspread. My sister's laying on top of her, using her own body as a shield, and my aunt is hovering over the two, just screaming like a mad woman, and in her hand is one of her shoes. It was one of those women loafers with a light sole and slight heel. She was using the shoe to beat both my sister and cousin, swinging away trying to make contact with any amount of skin. She was really just trying to get my cousin, but didn't care that she was hitting my sister in the process. I'm frozen in absolute fear, never having seen anything like this before. Sure, Mother got mad at me and I got the occasional spanking, but nothing like this. I'm afraid to even say anything and fear that my aunt will turn on me and start attacking me. I slowly start to back away. When I look to the ground, that caused my eyes to widen. On the floor was my sister's jewelry box. It was all wood and had magnetic drawers to prevent the jewelry from spilling out if you knocked it over. It was just laying on the round, all the drawers open, and jewelry spilled on the floor. I looked at the box, then to my aunt, and quickly figured out what that loud banging noise I heard earlier was. Yes, my aunt had thrown my sister's jewelry box at my cousin. Luckily, my cousin dodged it and hit the wall, but she had thrown it with so much force that it caused all the magnetic drawers to pop open. That's when I truly realized my aunt had lost it. I turned and ran back in my room, locking the door behind me, waiting for my mom to come home. I wasn't old enough to have a cell phone, and we didn't have a house phone, so there was no one I could call. I stayed in my room until the shouting stopped. Turns out, my aunt had just gotten tired of hitting and yelling, so she went outside to smoke. My sister hugged my cousin, comforting her until everyone else got home. What bothers me most is that the entire incident was just brushed off. No one said anything to my aunt, nor reprimanded her for her behavior. I think my aunts had made it all seem not like a big deal when my cousin deserved it, and so did my sister for defending her cousin when she was in the wrong. She was believed over us because we were kids and she was the adult. I know this isn't really as scary or terrifying as what other people have experienced, but of all the messed up things that have occurred in my life, this had one of the bigger impacts. I can't even look at my aunt without thinking about it. I will say this. My family is finally starting to recognize the true person my aunt is, that her so-called discipline was actually abuse. They refuse to condone her behavior anymore, especially my mother. Despite the fact that I'm an adult now, my aunt still scares me. But at least now, I have my family to back me up.